Welcome to Daredevil and the Details, a show that explores and dotes on the philosophy and themes of Netflix's Daredevil, a digression collection brought to you by Method to the Madness and ZeroIndent. I'm author DC McNeil, and I'm joined by co-host of Method to the Madness, Patrick Laverne. What's up, Pat? How you doing?
Hi, good, doing good, David. How are you?
That's man. I gotta be honest with you. I kind of spaced out my viewing of these episodes over the last kind of few weeks in the preparation. We both love Daredevil. And I was coming into this and I was like, I'm gonna have a good time. Like it'll be great. What I wasn't expecting was like these opening episodes are so good. It's
Dude,
unbelievable.
It's such a good show. Yeah, it somehow gets better like every time you rewatch it, and that's probably why I think a lot of the subtext is very interesting once you see how all the puzzle pieces fall into place. It's such a delight to like watch these early episodes.
It really is. I think there's a and we'll kind of, I suppose one of the things I want to try and do at the start of each episode before we get into the specific episodes is just kind of like what we think this chunk of episodes is about, and then we'll talk through them kind of generally. This episode we're covering episodes 1 through 3, and this is really kind of the instantiation of the key players in the plot. So you get Matt Murdock, you get Nelson, you get Karen Page, and then of course you get the employer, which is a reveal that we get at the end of episode 3. And this really is the establishing of Hell's Kitchen as a location and a place with people and players in it. What's kind of like your general vibe on these episodes, aside from they're freaking incredible? What do you think this opening is about? Or like, what do you think it's trying to do? Or like, what do you think it's about? Like, do you have any kind of broad strokes thoughts at the top?
Regarding these 3 episodes, because the third episode it ends on that sort of trial. I forget the guy's name who they're defending.
Healy.
Healy. Yeah.
Healy, and then he's got a Russian last name that I cannot recall. He is called Healy.
Isn't it something Healy? Oh,
Prohaska. Healy Prohaska.
Wait, isn't Prohaska the guy he kills?
Oh, John Healy is the murderer, and then Prohaska is the Russian mobster that he kills.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, so I mean, in this arbitrary section that we've selected for ourselves, if we're going to draw meaning of this 3-episode arc, because it ends on that courtroom speech by Matt about the place of good and evil in a court of law. I feel like these 3 episodes are kind of setting up this idea about the limits of the law, and the show's giving its sort of argument on like vigilantism. Not real life vigilantism, obviously, but like vigilantism within the context of the MCU of specifically this universe, and why sort of Matt does what he does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say that's a fairly accurate assessment. I think there's also a lot here about what it considers to be sort of. When we get to the episode, we'll talk about Matt's sort of speech there, but there is an interest in the conflict of practical morality. So like what does it mean in the real world to do right and wrong? And then what does it mean philosophically or even like sort of theologically? And where might we identify the limitations of both systems? Like, where might we say that in reality something fails us, even though it philosophically or theologically might make sense, and then the alternative as well, where it's like, where might something theologically fail to actually have any kind of bite or meaning to it, or kind of have teeth when it comes to applying to the kind of arguments of right and wrong. And I guess like that's probably a good segue for us to talk a little bit about the episodes. So the way that we're going to structure this is we've got a summary for each of these episodes, and we'll kind of read through the summary, or I'll have Pat read them, and then we can kind of talk about what the episode is doing, anything notable. Obviously, with this format, we're going to have longer conversations about some episodes, shorter conversations about others, and there might be things that we preemptively bring to the table as well. I'm open, I think we're both open to the show kind of expanding and finding its feet as it goes. I have some pretty light notes on the first 2 episodes and some pretty detailed ones on the third. So I guess we'll see what happens. I'm just honestly really excited to talk about this because, like I said, I had such a good time revisiting it, and I've been relishing each episode, sitting down in the right headspace, ready to consume it. It's been an absolute thrill. So do you want to? The first episode, which is Into the Ring, was written by Bill Everett and Drew Goddard, the show's creators, and it was directed by Phil Abraham. So, Pat, would you read us the summary for the first episode?
Yeah, sure thing. And also, as far as I could tell, Bill Everett and Drew Goddard wrote every episode for the first season, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, they write everything.
Every other season?
They write everything until the Defenders.
Ah, okay, interesting.
Not sure what to. There were EPs on that, but I'm not sure what to make of that. We might talk about that a little bit as we get closer.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the what's the word for it? Like that was where the larger Marvel apparatus kind of took over, or like kind of, it became out of their control. And then when you get into season 3, it's no longer written by them. It's sort of different writers credited for every episode.
Oh. That is super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it?
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So episode 1, Into the Ring. As a child, Matt Murdock is blinded by toxic chemicals as a result of saving a bystander. As an adult, Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson are opening a scrappy law firm. At night, Matt dresses in a black mask and fights the rising criminal element in Hell's Kitchen. The Russian mafia, Yakuza, and Chinese mob each exploit the changing cityscape in the wake of the incident. Nelson and Murdock step in to assist Karen Page, a secretary for Union Allied framed for the murder of her co-worker after stumbling onto a pension fund being used to launder money. Murdock and Nelson prevent Karen from being prosecuted and leak the story to reporter Ben Urich at the New York Bulletin. Karen offers to work for Nelson and Murdock. Meanwhile, James Wesley covers up his employer's involvement in the money laundering and orders Russian mafia leaders Anatoly and Vladimir Ranskahov to eliminate the Man in Black. They kidnap a young boy to lure the Man in Black into a trap.
A few things that I think are really interesting about even just like the structure of this first episode. We open on the hero origin story moment.
Yeah.
I mentioned this to you last episode, which I think is still very funny, but it's the same ooze that makes the Teenage Ninja Turtles before franchises were things that you had to own.
Oh, I grew up with Ninja Turtles. I really Ninja Turtles, which are the same universe as Daredevil.
Yeah.
Is
that real?
Slime, the slime that made the Ninja Turtles is what
Ninja Turtles were Marvel?
So what?
Oh, Stick.
They're not
Shredder, all
Marvel.
those
They're
things?
inspired by Daredevil. So the creators of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, when they were Scott Eastman, I think, when they decided when they were coming up with Ninja Turtles that the same they were big Daredevil fans, that the same chemical spillage that blinded Matt Murdock then went into the sewer and created the Ninja Turtles, which is why
that would be a sick crossover.
Guy,
which is why you have. Well, he's in the first episode. Like the first comic which I have, Ninja Turtle comic, has the Daredevil backstory in it.
No.
Yeah, but that's why you have we have Stick, obviously, and they have Splinter. And then there's the hand. We have the hand. They have the foot.
I just got educated
fun
today.
If you go back and read it.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Which is very funny. Something else that we get that I didn't include in the summary because it doesn't really fit with the structure is like these first few episodes, and then later in the season we get a lot of flashbacks to Matt and his dad and their relationship, and sort of how that informs the for want of a better word, like the Daredevil persona, like the sort of, in this case, the Man in Black, and you know, Matt's sort of inner demons, or whatever we will end up calling his need to hurt people physically. And so we get a
Murdoch
decent...
boys, they got the devil in them.
They got the devil in them, yeah. And one of the things I pulled out of this episode that I've quoted, I've written in my notes, is there's something interesting happening pretty early on in this episode where Matt, as a kid, kind of valorizes or kind of lionizes his dad, but for the reason that he's able, you know, he says, you know, he's able to take a hit, or the exact quote he says is, he was always on his feet when he lost.
Right.
And there's something interesting about obviously one of the key themes of like this character is going to become the fact that like he will get the absolute crap beaten out of him, and he will always try and get up and keep fighting. And yeah, I noted it here in a way that I haven't previously, kind of to what you said before about always taking something new away. What, like, I guess I'm curious on your thoughts, because you've watched this almost as much as I have, or if not more. Where do you land on, I guess, like, you know, the way that the opening is framed, with like he loses his eyesight, and then this kind of legwork to show us how this blind kid might end up becoming the Man in Black, even if we don't explicitly get the story of it, we get thematically that like he comes from a family where this was already in him, sort of thing.
Yeah, it is notable that the very first scene is that the incident where he got blinded. Like it sort of frames this story in this moment of, you know, like really like deep trauma for Matt Murdock, and you know, to me, like that is, it sort of shows me that this series is sort of immediately committing to like building this like troubled psychology, and like really attempting to explain the things he does through his psychology, through this backstory that is like, there's a lot of backstory in this first season. I always forget that, like, pretty much I think every episode it shows some flashbacks at least, and you know, it keeps evolving too. Like in the later arcs, you explore the his relationship with Stick and that whole backstory. And I think these memories of his dad and like watching his dad fight as a boxer, I think they're like really amplified because it's from when he could see, and so it's just like really potent trauma for Matt, I think.
I hadn't ever thought about that. That's really interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's actually, I suppose, contrasted with the way that we see in the second episode when he is blind and he's listening to his dad's TV tape, you know, rather than the tape, it's you know, it's the TV broadcast of the fight, and he's listening to the announcer, and he's cheering on the fact that like his dad is getting hit repeatedly, but he can't see what's happening. There's something interesting there, and I think that kind of ties into a theme that I already noticed in this first episode around, I mean, so the opening credits, we should say, for those who haven't seen it, the kind of opening credits are the you know, the intro, as Netflix calls it, you know, that's where you've got these kind of red liquid that's pouring into different shapes, and one of the notable shapes is the Justice statue, which is obviously has its eyes covered, and you know, Justice is blind, and that's one of the things that the original comics were riffing on, as you know, as well as the kind of Batman mythology. But I think what's interesting about if you know, that lack of sight that he has, or his inability to see, and specifically the imagery of the mask, right? There's something there with his father passing, and with his faith as well, with his Catholicism. One of the quotes I pulled out, which is gut-wrenching and really interesting, is Karen kind of says to him, so they, she's worried for her life because Union Allied are coming after her, and she needs somewhere to stay that's safe. They basically framed her for murder, as we said in the summary, right? And so he's like, come back to my apartment, you know, I can protect you. And there's this really oddly intimate scene where they're completely soaking wet, and he grabs her shirt, and she changes in front of him because she knows he's blind. And almost as a result of that moment where she realizes that she can take her shirt off and change, and it's not going to be an issue because he can't see, she asks him, "Do you miss it?" And Matt says, "Yes." And then she says, "I can't imagine what that's like." And there's this way in which, like, I think for Matt as a character being established, I don't know how intimate we are supposed to think this admission is, because we know he can see, or not, you know what I mean? We know that he is the Man in Black, right? So it's curious where it's sort of like Karen reads the situation as incredibly intimate in a way that she isn't able to experience with other people necessarily, because of the fact that she's able to do this in front of him and he can't see, and then she asks him about the thing that people would always ask him about. But it's never really clear. Like, Matt in this first episode, in the absence of when we flash back to him as a kid, he's kind of a really ambiguous closed box when it comes to, like, what he thinks of his situation, and being blind in general, and being the Man in Black in general. Like, he seems to treat it as like a compulsion in a sense. And I think there's something happening there, and I'm not sure what it is, related to his father's death and related to his faith. Like, there's some kind of triangulation happening where he can't...
Well, there's this really interesting revelation in season 3 about how he thought it was an act of God, you know, and him getting these powers was God telling him, like, this, you have a responsibility to protect, you know, the weak and innocent, which is like, I love that. and you know, that sort of ties in a lot to his crisis of faith in that season as well.
That's a really interesting character note as well, because here I think he feels a compulsion to, actually that makes a lot of sense, because the thought I was going to express was that he seems like he feels a compulsion to his faith, like his religious faith. He seems to be, even the little bits we get here, he seems to not want to be Catholic, but he is necessarily Catholic. Like, it is part of his just, like, fundamental DNA, in the same way that he doesn't really want to be the Man in Black, but he has to be. Like, he's compelled to it.
Yeah.
And it seems like all of that stems from that trauma that we see at the start. Like you said, you know, makes sense if you put it in context with that future knowledge of, like, it's a gift from God, or it's the, you know, that self-justification for the trauma, right? Like, it's a big thing that my therapist has talked to me a lot about, is like this idea that when something really bad happens, we try and ascribe meaning to it because it helps us avoid processing the negative thing that happened. If you can say everything happens for a reason and the reason was this, it makes it a lot easier to avoid the consequences of that thing happening, right? You look at the positives instead of confronting the reality. And, you know, one of the things that's just, like, true about the nature of reality is, like, for us, because of the way that we live our lives, right, we think of those things as significant, or we try and ascribe significance to them because they are 1 in a million occurrences. But when the numbers are as big as they are, and they're as big as they are, if not bigger than most of us understand, 1 in a million things happen every few seconds, right? We're just not used to living on that scale. And I think there's something about, like, especially, like, if you're establishing a character, this seems like a really hard task to do, and they do it with such elegance. Charlie Cox doesn't have to do he's doing a lot of quiet acting in a lot of these moments where that scene with Karen where what he doesn't say is as loud as what he does. There's something sort of I'm not sure what the word is, but I'm sure you've thought about this before as well. There's something really careful and understated, you know, in the tone of the show that I think lends itself to these kind of themes and philosophies that it's tackling.
Right. Yeah. I think, you know, in that that scene directly after the first scene where Matt's in confession and he's talking to Father Lantom, and he's giving the speech about, you know, how his father, there'd be moments when he would just go berserk, and, you know, he'd see the devil being let out. and he has, his performance just gives this really like deeply troubled energy to it, and I think that's like sort of what you're talking about. Like it's just there's this real underlying like trauma to everything in the show, and it's just it's the show is like Karen, just like constantly looks constantly stressed out.
Yeah, Karen is the most like harried person I've ever seen in my entire life at all times. Even when she's done up in makeup and like wearing nice clothes, she just is so harried. There's something about her just
Props to her. Like that must be so taxing. Like just to look that stressed out all the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the friend you have that smiles and you're like, that wasn't a smile because you're happy. It was a smile because there was some respite. Like it's sort of, she's very dire. But I think ultimately that's why she fits in with Nelson and Murdock, is like, they feel like two dudes who had these obviously Matt has his particular traumas and so does Foggy, but like they feel like these two friends who, and we see a bit of this in season 2, they feel like they made the right decision with their careers, to do the right thing, and they just like they haven't worked out how to live with that yet. Like they even in this early episode they're trying to be cheerful about it, but it's almost like a trauma response where they're always like kind of doing buddy cop bits and jokes and stuff, because they just can't face to the fact that like this is probably a mistake. Like we're probably this thing it really better work out.
But I mean that's sort of, I don't know, that's a very crucial element to like to conveying to us like who they are. Like they're willing to give up this cushy, like high-paying position at Landman and Zach to actually help people. And you know how they're like both on board. The further you get into the show, the further the story starts to like show you the slight differences between Foggy and Matt and like their philosophies and helping people, which is very interesting.
I think the key thing you touched on there is what does being on board mean for both of them, and it's a very different thing. And I think like episode 3 we see a lot of we'll get to it. We see a lot of Matt being on board for like the bigger picture, but undercutting Foggy to get there in a way that's like in a way that's really interesting. Like Matt's like not a good friend.
Dude, he's awful. He's the kind of guy that like, you message like a month prior. He's like, oh bro, you coming to my party? He's like, yeah bro, I'll be there. And then like an hour before the party, he's like, no, sorry man, something came up.
100%. He's the classic like superhero of vigilante style double life guy. I think an interesting point of comparison. So I just finished rewatching Invincible. I don't know if you've seen that. It's the based on the Kirkman comics, I believe. Really interesting way that like, because that character's a teenager, they sort of, the consequences are like, he's trying to go on a date with somebody and he has to like kind of make up a dumb excuse because he has to go be a superhero or whatnot. And the ultimate conclusion that show comes to with when Amber's like, yeah, I fucking worked out you're a superhero, dude. Like that doesn't excuse the fact that you're a shitty boyfriend. There's something about Matt's approach that is so much more deft. I think it's because A, he's like 35, like he's an adult working through all this stuff, but B, it seems to me that like someone like Foggy gives him a lot of rope and runway, because like Matt, like when Matt's there and he's fully present, he's really fully present. It feels like it's that kind of like weird thing where you kind of excuse it because you're like, yeah, but like he really does give a shit, and like he probably had a good reason. And also,
he had a troubled childhood. All right? Yeah, I can give him some slack. Yeah.
And he has the best excuse ever, which is that he's fucking blind. Like it's really hard to, like, you know what I mean? Like it's really hard to sort of go, and I also enjoy the way that they really play up something the comics try and get away with to a lesser success, which is whenever he's really fucked up from being Daredevil, he's always like, yeah, I like fell or walked into a street without realizing, and it's like, yeah, that would happen. Like,
and it ties in so nicely to the excuse that Foggy gives Karen later, that he's an alcoholic. And like,
yeah,
you know, if you're an alcoholic, if you're a blind alcoholic, yeah, you would be fucking running into doorways and shit like all the time. Like,
yes.
Makes total sense.
It does. I also quite like. I mean, this scene's great as a tone setter. I like Matt's apartment and this idea that like he got it real cheap because it has just this obnoxious billboard outside that no one else would buy, but he doesn't give a shit because he's blind. Really clever, like thinking about the world and like. It gives him the excuse to have the big space that looks good on set and films well, in a way that I think you would otherwise be like, if he's broke as heck, how does he have a nice place? Like, it's really good, like multi-purpose storytelling, I feel.
It fits the show's aesthetic so well, like this Art Deco apartment with interesting purple lighting, like
the weird neon,
Yeah, it's so good. And I like the explanation he gives. For some reason, I like it, how he's like, oh, you know, the co-op nearly rioted. It was some oversight by the developers agreement. Mm-hmm. Like, the show has a lot of funny details like that. Actually, you know, I wrote in my notes that I compare it to, funnily enough, Better Call Saul. You know, I say funnily enough because they're both law dramas, but also Breaking Bad. But yeah, it's got a similar vibe when it comes to showing process.
What do you mean? What do you talk more about that? What do you mean?
So, for example, after like the Union Allied story gets published, you know, that's a pretty big deal. Like Fisk wanted to keep that under wraps, but then Wesley and Fisk have that conversation about how they're going to clean everything up, and Wesley just sort of runs through all the stuff like, oh, you know, this person overdosed an hour ago. We're framing this person. And especially with like the law stuff of them running through and planning cases, they're very like thorough. They actually, you know, in the dialogue, there's a lot of, we'll do this, and use this and this. And yeah, Better Call Saul has a sort of similar method to the Madness.
we did it, guys. Podcast over. We did it.
Well, actually, I'm gonna butcher it. There's this really great video by, oh crap, who's it by?
What's the video? I might be able to tell you. What's the concept?
Oh, the concept is just how Better Call Saul is really good at showing process. It's by a channel that like covers sports, strangely enough.
Oh, okay.
And they just sometimes do video essays on Better Call Saul. It's quite strange.
The show's that good, it probably just inspires people to make art. Like,
yeah,
like legit.
You know, but for some reason they make like some of the best Better Call Saul content I've seen. The Ringer. Well, that's them. But yeah, anyway, it just makes for a really interesting and like robust plot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my TED talk.
Interesting. On the process thing, it reminds me a lot of like House MD and shows like that, where they're adding detail that isn't strictly necessary because it like makes it. There's this is now available on the internet again, thank goodness. Rybold talks about this a lot, but there's a video called like the Shantification of Fallout. And Shantification is like this concept of adding detail to a story that isn't necessary for the story you're telling. And one of the things...
You talked about this last time, didn't you?
I might have done, because I probably literally just rewatched it when I watched it last time. I've written in my notes here for these episodes that... this show is really good at including elements that contribute to that kind of extra world building that isn't necessary without them feeling obtrusive. And I think things like the way that Matt and Foggy talk about building a case, the way that Matt's throwaway little joke comment about, the zoning committee finding that, they found a loophole and things like that. It was almost a riot. There's a way that it or even at the end of this episode where Karen bakes like her grandma's recipe or something. I can't remember, whatever cooks them a meal based on some recipe. Like whatever those moments are, They feel important for the characters, and they kind of smuggle in the world building. They kind of it's an expression I've used before, but the greatest trick a writer can pull is to launder detail through emotion. So if you can have a moment where it feels like characters are connecting, that also delivers some thing about the world or the way the world works, or in your what you're talking about the process, right? That's kind of how you get this really smooth, understated tone, which I think like Breaking Bad in particular, and Better Call Saul obviously to a greater extent, and Mad Men is the classic example. That's where you really get the most of that, right? Like in Mad Men, it's obviously the talk about the advertising and media spend and things like that, and you kind of get this. You kind of get like a reflection of what these processes are like through all these little details. You don't get the specific descriptor of it, and House MD is brilliant for that as well. But yeah, I mean,
I think it's you were saying last episode. This show's got texture. I feel like that's what the details like this add, grit and texture.
Yeah,
and it
grit
makes you believe in this world.
Yeah, grit is the really important thing as well. Like there are things that feel coarse to like consume, like coarse to work out and pass through what's happening, where it's like, oh, that doesn't really quite fit in with like my smooth picture of Hell's Kitchen, and it makes it, I think it makes it feel more real, because not everything clicks together super neatly. Like that example where Wesley's like talking about the cover up, some of it you're like, that sounds really complicated and like shouldn't fit together, and that's part of what makes it feel, and that's kind of like a tautology, but it does, that paradox makes it feel real, where you're like, oh well, I clearly don't have the whole information here, so I can't see how this all fits together fully, so I have to trust that this person either knows what they're doing or doesn't. That's going to tell me something about them.
Well, yeah, but I feel like the show, it does, when it does show you stuff like process, what am I, like, like in those examples where you're just listening to Wesley go like, yeah, this is how I solve this problem, you go, yeah, okay. But then the show, when it commits to showing you other processes and like in like real like detail and like really thoroughly, it builds up enough like goodwill so that when those moments happen where Wesley is talking about how he's handled these other situations, you believe it.
Yeah.
Because you're like, if the show wanted to expand on that, it could, absolutely. I believe it. But, just, for the sake of time, like, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, well, like, I suppose that's what I mean, though, is like, that's the show is working because it convinces you that Wesley always knows what he's doing.
Right.
By showing him do complicated things and then having him talk about process.
Which I feel like that's also how it goes in Better Call Saul. You know how like that show and Breaking Bad has a lot of like cold openings, just has such a trope in that series, how the first shot of an episode is like on an object and it's like slowly panning out or, something like that. And you're like, what the fuck is this object? It means nothing to me now. But you always know it's going to mean something.
Yes.
Because you're watching Better Call Saul. It's going to come back around. It's going to be super meaningful.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think there's like something, it's going to be difficult to kind of keep in frame, I think, as we continue with the show and like work through it, because I think it becomes that kind of proficiency becomes so part of the tapestry, like the texture of the show just becomes the thing it's always doing, that it can be really easy to like, not that you don't notice it, but just it just kind of goes past you because it pulls you in so hard. Like Hell's Kitchen feels like such a real place that it's really easy to not notice when those things are happening. I think especially when it's like, as the seasons ramp up and you're in the kind of like, penultimate stages of a plot or whatever, they're always doing this. Like it's always happening. And it's just like, it's honestly it's just really impressive, frankly. It's hard to do and it's hard to do well. And I think like even in the kind of these opening throws, like, God, there is some stuff in this where like the fact that, we get the incident mentioned offhandedly. No one says what happened.
Well, the landlady does, the real estate agent.
With the office, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. She goes, yeah. Oh, I can't remember what she says exactly, but she goes, what else would you call, death and destruction raining from the sky or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean, she doesn't explicitly say the Avengers came and fought aliens.
But that's kind of my point. Is like it's already it's already gone into common parlance of like you're already doing like you're already just alluding to it as like that's a joke, right? She's doing a joke. She's not saying, oh my god, that incredibly traumatic event that time that the Avengers fought a bunch of aliens and nearly destroyed the planet. She's doing a bit, kind of, and like that tells you a lot about the world and how New York is reacting to it and like what that means for Hell's Kitchen.
And I love how it's not used very flippantly either. Like it is quite literally the MacGuffin to this whole series. And that is why like Fisk and all these other people were able to take control of New York. Yeah, like it's I love it. It's so good. It's as Leland says. Heroes and their consequences are why we have our current opportunities.
Oh, great! What a great line. Heroes and their consequences. Like, this show is just full of quotes like that where you're like, God damn, I wish I wrote that. That's such a good.
There are some great quotes in episode 3, which we'll get to.
Oh, we will. I don't have anything else in episode 1, except for the fact that the fight at the end is still iconic. The slow-mo in the rain and the way that like it communicates how this is an advantage for Matt being in the rain is so it doesn't say that, but you know that from the way that it's shot and from the way that they slow down and then the way that you hear him hearing the chain and then the way that you hear the knife cutting through the water and how that helps him avoid it. Like it's so tidy. Like the final fight is that it's just. I mean, it's spectacular. It communicates so much with no dialogue. It's incredible.
I agree, and he doesn't really explain how he uses his powers until like episodes after. So it's really good. I agree.
Yeah. Anything else on episode 1, or shall we chat episode 2?
Well, just that. We get the introduction to Wesley. I don't know why, but I really like Wesley. He's such an awesome character.
He's so great. I have a lot to say about him in episode 3. He's really just... He's hard to look away from, frankly.
Oh, he's... Yeah, I mean, each season has, like, special things about it. The first season has Wesley, and so it will forever be, held in high regard.
He's great, yeah.
Yeah.
And as sort of the face of as the face of antagonism until the end of season 3, really compellingly. I don't mean this as a derogatorily, but compellingly plain compared to the other bad guys that we meet, the other mobsters. Like they all have like a shtick, right? Like Lady Gao, and then Nobu's this Japanese dude in a suit, and the Russians are like the most Russians you've ever seen people Russian about. And then he's just like this unassuming businessman. There's something really compelling about the quiet malice that he wields.
It's just that how he's like so ruthlessly efficient with his threats and like in violence and like it's like his actions really do speak a lot louder than his words.
Bless me, Father, for I've sinned. It's been too long since my last confession. My dad, he used to come to this church back when I was a kid. He was a fighter, old school boxer. Lost more than he won. Had a 24-31 record before he... But he could take a punch. Jesus, he could take a punch.
Language?
Sorry, Father. Yeah, guys he went up against used to say I was like hitting oak. Yeah, nights when he was outmatched, my dad's strategy was to let him hit them till they broke their hands. He never got knocked out, my dad. Knocked down, sure, but he always got back up. He was always on his feet when he lost.
So episode 2 is called Cut Man. It was written by Bill Everett and Drew Goddard. and it was directed by Phil Abraham. So Pat, would you kindly read the summary?
Yeah. So, as a child, we follow Matt Murdock and his father, Jack Murdock, a B-string boxer whose only real talent is getting hit and getting back up. Back in the now, a nurse, Claire Temple, drags a nearly dead Murdock from a dumpster. Claire treats Matt's wounds, and Matt explains he failed to save the child the Russians kidnapped. Meanwhile, Foggy and Karen get drunk and romp through Hell's Kitchen. Karen reveals her struggle with the city and her sense of safety in the wake of Union Allied sending a Russian hitman to kill her in the previous episode. Murdock and Claire capture the Russian searching for the man in black and torture him into revealing the location of the kidnapped boy. In the past, battling Jack, Murdock double-crosses the Irish mob to set Matt financially for life, and decides to get back up again for the last time. As Karen confronts the coming day in the city, Matt gets back up and faces the Russians. In a charged, awkward fight, Matt defeats the Russians and saves the boy.
Something you'll have noted that I've done there with that summary is I really wanted to call attention to the way that the past narrative kind of rhymes with the present. It's this episode is just, I mean, it gives me goosebumps like just thinking about it now. Like what a really interesting, understated way to thread these things together.
Obviously, I mean, we talked about how being the blinding accident really traumatized Matt, but this is the other big trauma in his life is how how deeply crime has scarred Matt. I say crime to encapsulate his father getting killed by mobsters, because the connecting thread there is that obviously he's putting on pajamas and fighting crime in his adult life, and he goes to save a kid who was similarly being affected by crime, and he's it's a really beautiful ending. There's that nice music playing, and he takes off his mask and he goes, "Don't worry, it's okay now. I'm gonna get you home."
He gets to do for this kid what no one was able to do for him.
Right. Which is like Batman as well, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So okay, let's talk about Jack Murdock, I guess, because this episode really dwells on him. Jack Murdock. There's the opening shot I think we get in the flashback is a blind Matt. So this is post accident. And he's watching / listening to his dad in a boxing fight, and the announcer is sort of describing Jack not hitting back. And it goes on for a minute. Matt's kind of cheering for him, but kind of knows that it's sort of all over Red Rover. And kind of some of the things that this made me think of is, what is Matt to make of the world where kind of his main role model, this man who will sometimes just willingly take a punch and then get back up and survive and use that to make money. What does that do to the way that he lionizes people or ideas or different behaviors, right? One of the themes that we see in the next episode is the idea of sacrifice, right? There's this idea that he kind of glorifies, or at least is very close to this person who's sort of willingly sacrificing his physical health and his body, to support Matt or to do something. And Matt being the cut man for his dad while his dad insists he completes homework, the dyad there, this conflict of Jack Murdock's material conditions with his ideology, is something that I think persists through Matt's life as well. The conflict of, and when I say material conditions, if you don't have a master's in English literature or philosophy, what I'm trying to say there is the facts of Jack's life, the fact that he's a kind of a shitty boxer, they're super poor, obviously they had to spend most of what money they had on Matt's treatment and things like that. The fact that all of that has happened conflicts deeply with Jack Murdock's ideology of you should get up and you should be proud of what you do in the world and what you do out in the world, while actively doing things that undercut that philosophy.
That all ties back into his dependence on pretty much like crime.
Yes.
Right? Because in order to survive, he needs, and you know, like the ubiquity of crime in this world is like sort of, you know, always comes back to keeping people like Jack Murdock down and being dependent on, you know, like criminals with a lot of money. There's a sort of like, I don't know, circular dependency, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, and there's something there about like the way that, you know, Union Allied is kind of pressure, like is able to sort of put pressure upon Karen now that she is out of the regular system. She's now vulnerable. Like now that she no longer has a standing within like the kind of regular structure, like the corporate world or whatever, she is now vulnerable to the pressures of organized crime. And I think there's an interesting delineation between the opening scene we get with the Man in Black in the first episode, which is him stopping Turk human trafficking, basically, and this imaginary, and I use imaginary not to say that it doesn't happen in real life, but the imaginary of organized crime, of crime that is like manipulating systems to achieve its end. A lot of what Wesley does is like what we would consider white collar crime, where he's sort of using blackmail to leverage different people in different businesses and positions to get the outcomes that his employer wants. It's not necessarily the same kind of like there's like there's a through line you can trace from the Irish you know, mob taking advantage of Jack to the kinds of people that you know, Fisk ends up becoming as the employer, and then indeed as Fisk's own father ends up becoming, right? Like there's something crunchy and kind of interesting to chew through there about he has to rely on these people while trying to teach his son about like morality and that like you shouldn't let your material conditions affect your kind of philosophical outlook, while his material conditions necessarily impact his philosophical outlook. Like there's sort of I don't know, I think Jack Murdock represents someone that Matt just comes to kind of he struggles against that inherited trauma, but I think it comes to define him in a lot of ways. Yeah,
and there's another sort of like contradiction that rubs off on Matt is how Jack Murdock, you know, he's a boxer. He punches people for a living, and you know, combined with that speech he gave about how his eyes would go dead. But he's also just like this really like affectionate like father. He just seems like a really good dad. Like he loves his kid like a lot. And yeah, that like juxtaposition of like violence and like love is something that you see in Matt Murdock as well. Like
and he seems to perceive that as perhaps necessary, and that kind of goes to what we were saying a little bit earlier about like the way that he treats the people around him, where he's sort of like, well, obviously part of being in relationships with people, whether that's friendships, whether that's professional relationships, whether it's romantic, there seems to be this like necessary divide that exists for Matt, where you have to like have the ability to treat them poorly if you need to. Like they kind of go hand in hand, like that contradiction of like, I can be a bad friend sometimes, even though I care about somebody, and I can have a normal life and I can go and do all of this violence and exact all of this harm. There is something about that dyad, that tension that we get set up here, and obviously becomes really interesting, and the show becomes very concerned with it in later seasons, of like, what does that mean for you? I don't know, I think there's a quote that they both, it's clearly something that Jack says a lot, because Matt ends up parroting the back half back to him, where he says, sometimes even when you get knocked down, you can still win. It ain't about how you hit the mat, it's about how you get up. And I think that contradiction to what you were saying is like a really foundational thing for Matt's character. Like he has internalized that as like a way to kind of live life, I guess. and what to do in this scenario, in this specific episode, where he goes to try and save the kid, gets absolutely rinsed, and his response to that is, that doesn't really matter, it's about what I do next.
Right.
And
yeah, I think, and you know, it's ties into his conviction, man. You just, you know, you got to do what you got to do. Even if you get stabbed in the abdomen and beaten half to death, whatever, man, you're still gonna go like save this kid. You're gonna die trying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like which point I want to pivot to next. There's so much interesting philosophy in this episode already that the show just raises verbally. You get an incredibly excellent quote from Matt, which is from the comics, where he says, it's when his dad gets the costume, and he says, the thing about Red, they can't see how much you're bleeding, which is a pretty consistent through line from the comics. And this idea of like, one of the things that makes Jack intimidating as a boxer is that you could beat him half to death and he will get up and hit you back. And you see that one of the things that I think is really notable in the action choreography that we see again and again, is constantly in this show, people get punched really a lot. They go down and then they kind of stagger back up and try and have another go. Like there is this idea of like, I'm not sure what the word for it is, but it feels very tactile. Where they're like, I've been paid to do a job. I'm not just gonna take a few punches and go down. Like I'm gonna try and do my job. And that's mirrored in the thugs, and then it kind of mirrors itself obviously in Daredevil and his whole conviction to keep going, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, there is a lot of people that get back up, isn't there? Like,
yeah.
I think in the next episode, he's intimidating that guy who's got dirt on the juror.
He knocks him down
twice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. Okay, so the other thought I had on just kind of continuing on that tangent, I think, is there's this so Matt, it's when Jack comes back from getting the crap beaten out of him, and Matt is doing homework, and he reads a quote from Thurgood Marshall, which I thought was really interesting. I've never really seen a show go, okay, let's put a quote in our show that is just like what the show is about. So I'll read the quote back to you, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this, and I guess what you think this does for. I mean, obviously it's a tone setter as well.
Yeah.
So Matt reads this quote from Thurgood Marshall, which is, "There's a price to be paid for isolation and division. Democracy cannot flourish amid hate. Justice cannot take root amid rage. We must dissent from the indifference. We must dissent from the apathy. We must dissent from the fear." And it is like it's like this show's thesis statement, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Again, like, this first season especially, like, it really goes hard into justifying Matt's vigilantism,
Mm-hmm.
and this is sort of like it's like a potent part of that argument is that like you can't just sit around and watch all these awful things happen, especially if you can do the things that Matt can do. Mm-hmm. Like, it's such a compelling argument. Like, I think probably, you know, in a few episodes, Matt gives that explanation of how he, you know, how he heard someone, you know, abusing their daughter, and he took action, and then that it never happened again, and you know, he never slept better. Yeah, man, it's a compelling argument for and which is reflected in that speech.
What
you know,
do you
descending from apathy?
Do you think do you think it's the show justifying? Do you think it's the show justifying Matt's actions, or it's it's what the show is trying to help us? It's the show is trying to help us comprehend Matt's justification for what he does.
Yeah, sorry, as I think with all works of art that deal with sort of like moral ambiguity, mm-hmm. it's worthwhile to understand. It doesn't justify anything, but it's worthwhile to understand motivations. which is what's happening here.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to call attention to that. I think slight difference because I know exactly what you're saying. What this lets them do is, as a story, what this lets them achieve is like we get to challenge these assumptions throughout the story, and other characters will challenge them like actively and verbally. You know, we get quite explicitly Foggy in this season, and then next season Karen quite explicitly endorsing some of it. And the Punisher obviously endorsing it too much. And there's kind of I think it can be really challenging to do this, where like if you want to raise an idea and then kind of and sort of not naturalize it as true, it can be really tricky in text because I think sometimes a lot of writers we get caught in this trap of like in describing a thing to comment on it, we accidentally endorse it because we don't comment enough on it in the text.
Right, or you don't explore other perspectives.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so what you've ended up doing is like describing the shape of the thing instead of examining the shape of the thing. And that delineation, you know, your mileage is going to vary reader to reader, but I think definitely for me, like this show kind of gets it right, and I think gets it different in the third season in some really interesting ways that I'm sure we'll get to when we arrive there in a few months' time. I mean, pivoting to that, how do you take the torture scene between where Matt and the night nurse, so Claire, they capture the kind of Russian cop, the cop who's on like the Russians' payroll, and you know they torture him. What do you think we're supposed to take? Like, what's your take on this inclusion? Like, it's obviously trying to show us that like Matt's willing to do some pretty hairy things, but like, what are your kind of thoughts on like, I guess, where that's going or what it's doing?
I mean, yeah, I think it's just very intentionally trying to muddy your perception of his justification for why he does this. Especially because he throws the guy off the roof and he puts him in a coma.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, he'll live. That's not crossing the line for Matt. But, you know, I feel like maybe the audience's thoughts and feelings on that is reflected in Claire, who's, you know, like the most reasonable person in this show. He's like, the fuck, like, just put this guy in a coma, like, well, it's fine as long as you didn't kill him. What the hell kind of morality do you live by, mate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also like when he says, I think to your point exactly, Matt goes, I'm doing it because I enjoy it, and we don't know if he's lying, neither does Claire. And it's like, and then he pushes the dude off the roof, and you're like, wait, hang on, does he? Hang on. And and then Claire says, I don't believe you enjoy this, which I think is really interesting. And I think she's right in some regards. I think it comes back to the compulsion that we talked about. It's not that he enjoys it, it's that he has to. Like, he needs it. It's which is in itself like kind of a grim sort of sense of enjoyment of a thing, where it's sort of like it's gratifying, not gratifying, but it's like disgustingly pleasant to give in to like these urges, even though he doesn't want to.
And I feel like Matt doesn't really have, at this point, that much of an issue about letting his soul become darker, because it'll make it easier for him to do what he does. And so he doesn't really have a moral crisis as of yet. It's only when he starts sort of like confiding in Claire about like all his thoughts about being Daredevil, is that when he starts to be like, you know, maybe she has a point about losing my humanity and stuff like that.
Well, because I guess currently he doesn't really have a reason to. Like, he's kind of just going unchecked and like doesn't really have anyone that he's close to aside from Foggy. So it kind of makes sense. Like,
yeah.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, that's why Claire is such a good foil for Matt, like throughout all 3 seasons. Wait, is she in the 3rd season?
No, she ends up going into she and Luke Cage pair off in Luke Cage season 2, and she kind of goes away from Daredevil. which is really interesting.
Yeah, she's in season 2, and this it gets expanded more in that as well.
Yeah,
especially like there's a scene where Matt won't visit Foggy in the hospital, and she's like, you know, why don't you come down off your cross and hang out with us normal people for a change?
Brutal.
It's really some good stuff.
Yeah. Fucking talking truth right there. Jesus.
Yeah.
Give that woman her flowers. Finally. Yeah. Look. Damn. Like this is gonna be this entire fucking podcast, but like, it's so textured and enjoyable. Like there's so much to think about. Off the back of this moment where Claire's like, I don't believe you enjoy this. Nat and Jack, in their separate timelines, both decide to get up and finish the fight, even though they know it's probably going to kill them. Jack does it to financially secure Matt's life and dies. And then Matt gets up to save this kid and succeeds. And there is just this like, they refract off each other in such a really compelling way. It just makes you want to like sink your teeth in and be like, what does that mean for Matt? Like the fact that he's able to do what his father never could, because his father was always under the boot of this system and these organized criminals. Like he's able to kind of he's able to fight back in a way that his dad necessarily couldn't on his behalf. And his dad had to make the sacrifice, like you say, on the cross, right? Had to become the Messiah to save Matt, whereas Matt has the opportunity to keep fighting and to sort of to find a slightly different way of doing it.
You know, Jack's motivations are quite puzzling to me. Like,
okay.
And I haven't. I mean, was he suicidal? Because I just don't see how he could do what he did without knowing that it would like get him killed. And
he knows it's going to get him killed.
Yeah, but he has Matt to look after. He obviously loves Matt, but he just chooses to peace out anyway. And you know, he says like, oh, you know, he's securing Matt's future like financially. But I think they explore this a bit in season 3. Matt says, you know, he would rather have a dad than money. Yeah. So if you take what you said and put it in the context of if he was suicidal, that's some dark shit. Like, you know, because he was just, his prospects looked so hopeless and bleak. He was just like, fuck it, I'm gonna you know, get myself killed so that I can secure the future for my son and but also, you know, there's a reveal that a little bit of that motivation was because he actually wanted, you know, the fame and the glory.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is like there's two ways you can read the fight that he agrees to participate in. One of them is he wanted the fame and the glory, and the other is like he wanted Matt to finally be proud of him for once. Which I think is a really interesting if that's true and that's how we choose to read it, it's a really interesting misread of like what Matt values in his dad. Because like as you say, Matt says like I'd much rather have a father than like money and this one memory to look back on. And that to me kind of feels like that's where I think if we read it that way, the way that Matt goes after the kid is he's like, if I can save this kid who still has a family and has like his whole life still ready for him, that's worth getting back up for. It's not worth sacrificing myself, you know, in the absence of someone else's fulfillment or something. Like, I don't know. I guess it depends how you look at it. Because my assumption was always, or my reading was always like that Jack does it because he thinks that Matt, he thinks that it will make a difference for Matt if Matt can finally see him, you know, win a fight for once. Which
I think that is the most salient takeaway from this whole Jack sequence. I honestly, I think this thing about like suicide wasn't really considered when early in this show. it comes back up in season 3.
It does,
It's,
yeah. Or perhaps to reframe suicide, perhaps death wish is the right kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. Like literally ever. That's really interesting. Yeah, I guess that makes sense because he's so tied into the mob and like he just can't get out at all.
Yeah, and you know, it's like, again, like to what you were saying, like Matt has the tools to deal with stuff like this now. Or not. He has the tools to deal with this kind of stuff. And so I feel like there's kind of always hope for Matt that he can do good in the world. Whereas, you know, you take like Battling Jack's position, being, you know, being under the feet of mobsters and, you know, broke and, you know, he can't achieve glory to make his son proud of him. Like, yeah, it's just, I think it's pretty bleak.
Bleak is sort of how I describe Jack Murdock's like life. Like I don't know, raising a single kid, that kid gets, you know, in this horrible accident, and I think there's a really interesting conflict in Jack's perception's not quite what I mean. In Jack's comprehension of like his son and their relationship, where like, you know, Matt, the reason that Matt ends up blind is because his son did the right thing. And so when I was talking before about this conflict of like Jack's material conditions with his philosophy, his son enacted the philosophy that Jack is trying to teach him. And the result of that was like this horrific incident that scars Matt for life and completely changes the trajectory of his life. And then the outcome of following his philosophy for Jack is that he is like under the thumb of these mobsters and his life is not his own. And the only way that he can exert any influence over his own life whatsoever is to die. And there's this way in which Jack's kind of philosophy and that this focus on your utility as someone that can get up when you're injured, or but, you know, it's not about the fact that you hit the mat, it's about how you get up. Like that has like ruined the Murdock family in a really interesting way, and the only recourse to that is that they have, you know, the devil and the Murdock boys have the devil inside them. There's something there. I don't know what it is yet. I'm sure we'll find out as the show goes on and they expand it a bit. But there's something there about like whatever this guy thought is the way that you should approach the world. It didn't work. And Matt's just doing the same thing again, kind of.
Yeah, and if you're Matt, you take that within the context or within the frame of like, you know, God's plan. That is some real like that is some shit to reconcile within your own head. You know, like it would mess you up. Yeah,
and it did. Matt's a fucked up guy.
Yeah, sure did.
Like, yeah. Do you have anything else you want to talk about with episode 2?
Yeah, just what I was saying in the prologue episode about Foggy being an interesting foil to Matt regarding morality. I like how in this episode, you know, he picks up on how distressed Karen is, and you know, at first he doesn't really push her on it, but instead he offers to, you know, go out with her and tries to take her mind off it. And at the bar, he listens to Karen talk through her trauma, and he offers to help her in any way. And, you know, he's there for people when they need him. Contrast with Matt, who's not there for people when they need him, and he's absent a lot of the time, which causes the rift between Matt and Foggy in the Frank Castle trial. So even this early on, it really establishes Foggy's place in the thematic, you know, landscape of this show.
And I guess also to Karen and Matt's relationship, where she wants Matt to be there for her. Like you already kind of sense that like they have chemistry, right? Like that's you already get that this early on. And he keeps her at arm's length. And in the next episode, he treats her like an employee, right? Quite dismissively at one point. And then Foggy views her as a person because he can. And that's, as you say, like, yeah, that's his place in this kind of mix of people. And then it feels like, they're the two ends of the spectrum, and then Karen is kind of in the same way that, like, me and Mitchie are two ends of the spectrum, and you're the kind of bridging point. They have that similar kind of trio relationship, right, where it's like Matt on one end, Foggy on the other, and then Karen then is able to bridge the gap between them. That's a really good point. There's also something really interesting about, like, and we'll see it a little bit in the next episode, but like Foggy is less idealistic but more naive than Matt.
Yeah, naive in what sense? Because he's naive in terms of like the crime going on.
I think.
But what do you mean?
I think he, there's a lot of conflict in the show about, how are we going to make money? If we just take on big cases, we'll make money. And Foggy's kind of like, so I would say that like Matt has this idealism of like, we should just only take on cases that are morally good to take on. Foggy has that utility, but he doesn't quite like, to me at least, it doesn't seem like he's worked out if they did the stuff he's always joking about doing of like, we should just collect a paycheck and we should be rich or whatever. There's like a naivete to the suggestion. Like he hasn't quite fully comprehended like, okay, but if we did that, what would the implications be? It always seems to be this sort of like, not like a facile argument or anything like that, but I guess like naive in the sense of he seems less worldly than Matt because he's far less troubled than Matt. Is perhaps what I mean.
Right. Yeah.
Like he seems less in his Fifi conceit like 24/7 the way that Matt is, and that has a contrasting effect where he comes across as a little more boyish and like kind of rambunctious and that sort of thing.
Well, that's why they're friends. That's what Matt likes about Foggy.
Yes.
Is that Foggy sort of, he says when they first meet in college, he doesn't dance around Matt. He just goes up to him, fucking like grabs his hand and shakes it, and like Matt needs that. And
I guess that's for Foggy like why Matt is a really valuable friend as well. Is Matt will this is as much as he's always guarded, he will tell Foggy what he thinks, regardless.
Yeah.
Like they just have there isn't. Here we go. Let me see if I can do this. There isn't truth between them, but there is simplicity between them. And I think sometimes that is more important, where they don't need each other to be perfectly honest all the time, but their relationship is built on simplicity, where it's like you say what you mean in the moment, and we have a mutual respect based on that.
And a lot of the time, Matt is like, I think this is immoral. And then Foggy's like, yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah, exactly. I think contrasted with, Matt and Karen later, where they have honesty, but they lack simplicity, which is their biggest issue. It just feels like a really well thought out dynamic that they've kind of taken these archetypes from the comics and they've kind of gone, okay, but like, what is gonna really sustain the tension in these relationships? It's Foggy is a really interesting character who I think really gets sidelined by a lot of people's memories and things like that, because like he is kind of the normal guy. Next season he completely becomes really interesting and compelling, but I think definitely in this first season he is acting as the foil, right? Like he sort of, whilst he does have his own interiority, this is a season about Matt Murdock and Karen Page, like fully.
But again, like why I love revisiting this show and why I don't mind how he is in this season is because it's consistency.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing in this season about Foggy contradicts anything he goes on to do in the later seasons. And you pick up on like all the little things that are set up about him. I don't know. It's good. It's good stuff.
It's very good stuff.
I just have one remark about the end fight scene. This is how all my my missions in Assassin's Creed go. I sneak around, get noticed by the first guard, and then it's just a fist fight between me and 14 people.
Yeah. I have a few details in that fight that I really like. Obviously, the fun piece of trivia for my podcast history, the Daredevil hallway fight was one of the first episodes we did during the reformat of Art for Artists that made us,
I think I remember,
made us blow up and become really, really popular at the time, before all the radio programs came in and killed the industry. But what was really interesting about it was that I was able to show it to Ruby, who had never seen Daredevil, and she kind of watched it with me and was able to kind of understand just from like the choreography itself what this scene is trying to achieve, you know, absent the full context of having watched the show, which I think is a testament to like the action choreography is pretty sensational. Something else I noted here, I haven't really talked about it before. The sound design in this show is really excellent. They do a thing here where this obviously like, and for someone like CinemaSins this comment, because I know someone is thinking it. I know that the lights that they're using can't actually do this, but I love the tone piece of when Matt arrives, the primary sound you're hearing is the buzz of the contacts in the lights. When he throws the first punch, they go silent. And then when the fight is over, the hum of the contacts comes back into focus. It's a really little detail. It's a little detail, but it plays into that, you know, the Matt's apartment having the neon sign, and Hell's Kitchen just feeling grungy and industrial. There's a way in which, non-ironically, it is conjuring images of Gotham, right? One of the kind of primary sound devices in Nolan's films is that sound of like when you turn on industrial lights and you get the like, and then when you turn them off and they go, you know, there's that kind of sound palette of the heavy contact industrial lighting, and this uses that to tremendous effect, a little more subtly, I feel. I
thought you were gonna say that how when it turns off when he starts fighting is because he's tuning his attention to the people. Yeah, well, and then when he finishes fighting, he hears it again. Well, is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean that is the function of that. Is like it, as the viewer, it makes it your entire focus is on the physical occurrences here. And then it's exactly right. That's Matt being able to filter out these sounds and just focus on the breathing and the punches and the rustling of the cloth as these people move and things like that. It's a.
I was also gonna comment on the lights, and you know I do dig the whole noir feel to it. It's just funny though. Like, there's no way that a lot of these lights are like diegetic. Like, why the fuck is there a green light? Like,
yeah, I know.
You know,
it's great. It doesn't make sense.
But I don't care. Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we could talk about this fight probably for legitimately hours. The awkwardness and like the kind of the way that Matt will throw a punch and then fall down with it. Like, it's brilliant. It's really just
I love how everyone is like so tired.
No one wants to do it. It's brilliant. The way the thugs sort of slowly get back up and before they can, he's already having a go at them. It's still like an all-time action sequence. Really sensational and really good editing to make it look like a one-er, like really well done. Really, really just an excellent way to end your second episode of your TV show. Are you kidding me? This gets to be the end of your second episode of television for your show? Like, goddamn, amazing. It just, what an absolute home run.
Yeah.
Goddamn. All right, well, episode 3.
Can we take a quick break?
Yes, we'll take a quick break, and we will be, you may hear an advertisement, you may hear something, I don't know, but there'll be, for us, we're going to take a quick break. For you, you'll hear something, and we'll be right back. So we'll catch you guys after this brief message from our sponsors, probably. This episode of Daredevil in the Details is sponsored by Underink Press, ZeroIndent's publishing wing. Our whole philosophy is about publishing new, upcoming, exciting fantasy, sci-fi, and academic writers. we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to read your work. Follow our submission guidelines and submit your work. We'd love to publish it. Thanks so much. Welcome back. Okay, so let's talk episode 3, and then probably summarize our thoughts on the first chunk that we've watched. So episode 3 was written by Bill Everett and Drew Goddard, and directed by Adam Kane. Rabbit in a Snowstorm. So Pat, would you kindly read the summary for us?
Okay. So, Wesley hires Nelson and Murdock to defend John Healy, an assassin on the employer's books. Despite their moral objection, Matt insists they take the case, hoping it'll bring them one step closer to finding Wesley's employer. Karen receives an offer for hush money from Union Allied. Needing guidance, she seeks out assistance from Ben Urich, the reporter Murdock leaked the story to. Urich explains his editor is pressuring him to write fluff pieces rather than crime. Urich explains... Wait.
Read
what?
that as... That's one word, crime breaks.
Okay. Urich explains his editor is pressuring him to write fluff pieces rather than crime breaks that made his name. Meanwhile, Matt pursues Healy in costume and forces him to reveal his employer, Wilson Fisk. In a moment of clarity, Healy impales himself rather than face the consequences of revealing Fisk's identity. Matt must now live with the burden of this knowledge.
This episode goes so hard the whole time.
Yeah.
It is like I mean, the first 2 episodes are really engaging and excellent. This episode is it's just an emotional roller coaster from start to finish. It's so rich and interesting. I mean, this entire podcast we just be blowing smoke up this show's ass, but what the this is one of my favorite episodes of the show of all time, and always has been. It's the little things as well. The way that Turk's reintroduction is sort of spliced into Healy assassinating the mobster, right? I think Turk's inclusion at all is really curious as this recurring
This isn't
character.
his introduction, isn't it?
No, his first introduction is in the first episode where he's doing sorry, I said his reintroduction.
Right. I love how Turk is this running gag throughout all the Defenders properties, and it's so you never feel bad for him because he's a human trafficker.
He's
so
a bad
it's just
guy.
he's a really useful tool for to beat down. And his reactions are always great. I remember, I think it's in season 2, episode 1 of Luke Cage. Turk's doing his thing, dealing guns. Luke Cage just comes to him, destroys all his guns, right in front of Turk. Turk's just come on, man.
Yeah.
It's just so good.
He's really set upon in a way that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
It's like I was saying before, this is the kind of shanification I like, where it never errs into indulgence. Also because he's just really charming and fun to watch. But it just... And the way that the gag gets seamlessly blended in, where you realize that Turk is also not a very good weapon stealer, because Healy has the gun and he pulls the trigger and it he literally goes, "These guns will never jam, I promise you." And then we cut to the gun jamming. It's he's a very not good criminal, and that's part of why it's fun to rag on him, is he's not a threat, right? He's comic relief in a way that doesn't break the tone of the show, which would be hard to do without this. I don't know how else you do it. The show's so... is morose the right word? It's very... I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
It's just very self-serious.
Self-serious, exactly.
Yeah, and that kind of humor fits really well into it. In season 2, episode 1, again, of Daredevil, he does the same thing with Turk. He goes, "Come on, D, can't you just let me off just this one night?"
Just this once.
And then the Daredevil throws his keys into the water.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk to me about... So Wesley's a pretty large fixture in this episode. So to kind of, I guess, speak to the setup that I didn't include in the summary. So basically Healy... so Matt and Foggy are defending Healy from a murder charge, which we watch him do the hit. So we know it's murder. And he's pleading for self-defense. And one of the central parts of this episode is the courtroom. So they they've realized that the only way to get this case across the line is it's going to be really incredibly difficult for the DA to prove that it was self-defense, because all of the the Russian men that are with the victim, like the guy that gets killed, they're not going to provide a statement because they're criminals. So they realize the best way that they can get through this is to go to trial and to basically let the case prove itself that no one can prove that Healy wasn't acting in self-defense, even though we, Nelson and Murdock, and Healy know that he definitely killed this guy. He murdered this dude. This is their gambit, and they're taking a check from Wesley because Matt is sort of hoping this will get them closer to what's the new name of Union Allied now that they've reincorporated? Do you remember what it's called? It's something like Global something. It's got some ridiculous business name.
Confederated Global something.
Something, yeah. Like it's just like most like, and it's like shell companies on shell companies on shell companies type thing. And Wesley's really interesting because he kind of takes center stage in this episode. And again, like he's incredible. It's the little touches, like the fact that anytime he enters the room, Matt immediately picks up on the watch ticking, his specific watch make, the way that the jury reacts to him walking in. Matt is able to work out who he's intimidated or bribed or is threatening based on sort of their heart rate and things like that. You get a real feel for like how these powers of Matt's translate to his everyday life and become really useful in particularly like in the courtroom. We can get into the meat of it if you want. I mean, obviously Matt's speech here is sort of the central question of the episode, right?
I've got good and evil has no place in a court of law, only facts, and that conceit is like sort of what makes up this episode. And as I was saying earlier, like it shows the limits of the law in this world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, let me read it, and then we can maybe really get into like the philosophy of like what's happening here. So I'll read this out. I've got it in full. Okay, so quote:
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, forgive me if I seem distracted. I've been preoccupied of late with questions of morality, of right and wrong, good and evil. Sometimes the delineation between the two is a sharp line. Sometimes it's a blur. And often it's like pornography. You just know when you see it. A man is dead. I don't mean to make light of that, but these questions are vital ones. Because they tether us to each other, to humanity. Not everyone feels this way. Not everyone sees the sharp line, only the blur. A man is dead. A man is dead. And my client, John Healy, took his life. This is not in dispute. It is a matter of record, of fact. And facts have no moral judgment. They merely state what is, not what we think of them, not what we feel. They just are. What was in my client's heart when he took Mr. Prohaska's life, whether he is a good man or something else entirely, is irrelevant. These questions of good and evil, as important as they are, have no place in a court of law. Only the facts matter. My client claims he acted in self-defense. Mr. Prohaska's associates have refused to make a statement regarding the incident. The only other witness, a frightened young woman, has stated that my client was pleasant and friendly, and that she only saw the struggle with Mr. Prohaska after it had started. Those are the facts. Based on these, and these alone, the prosecution has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that my client was not acting solely in self-defense. And those, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are the facts. My client, based purely on the sanctity of the law, which we've all sworn an oath to uphold, must be acquitted of these charges. Now, beyond that, beyond these walls, he may well face a judgment of his own making. But here, in this courtroom, the judgment is yours. And yours alone.
It's there's so much in there.
Yeah. Because it's sort of toward the end of that speech, what grabbed me is that, outside of these walls, he may meet a judgment of his own. It kind of sounds like he's talking about some sort of, divine judgment.
Yeah.
But, obviously he's probably talking about himself.
Yeah, he means me. He's, yeah.
And like that's interesting because if you are a religious person like Matt Murdock, that is probably the two sides to morality in your eyes, the law and then divine judgment, right? So if it doesn't get prosecuted within the confines of the law, it's all fine. He's going to meet divine judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But tying into Matt's conviction and his thoughts about himself and his place in the world, thinking that he's a savior chosen by God to help these people. That's a very interesting contradiction about how he knows that there's going to be no divine judgment, and that it's up to him. And he, it's at the end of the day, it's the only reason why any justice is done is because he made it happen.
Mm. And there's the added layer of specifically that he ends up becoming called the devil of Hell's Kitchen, and then he adopts that imagery. It's like, and that direct contradiction with his faith, and the conversation that we get later in the season about do you believe in the devil? And it seems to be this thing of he necessarily has to damn himself to provide that justice. He must kind of sacrifice his own soul, if you want to kind of put a fine point on it. There's something that he's giving up, perhaps his humanity. You said it earlier, right? He's giving up his own humanity to exact this justice because it can't be done within the confines of the existing systems.
I think we should maybe say anytime we say soul in this series, it's like a shorthand for moral integrity or I don't know. Is there a better word for that?
I guess what we mean is the idea in storytelling of you have two kinds of jeopardy. Usually you have a mortal jeopardy, and then you have damnation as the jeopardy. And Matt's real struggle is damnation. In his own eyes, in the eyes of God, in the eyes of his friends, he is constantly picking and choosing where he is willing to damn himself. And that's sort of with the classic example is Silence of the Lambs, or Clarice Starling. She damns herself to get the job done by forsaking the beliefs in the systems of the FBI and all of these things, and she damns herself by getting help from Hannibal Lecter and by playing into his hand, but she does it knowing that it could be the break she needs. And so when we say soul, or his soul's on the line or something like that, we're really talking about for that character, their internal reckoning with themselves. For me, when have I gone too far, and when can if I do this, can I ever forgive myself, is usually what we mean when we say okay, well, it's really a question of they're putting their soul on the line. If they do this, they will never forgive them. They think they can never forgive themselves. Don't
you all know that religious aphorisms are tools for storytelling, guys? Come on.
Duh. Haven't you read Young? Isn't that just how all stories work? Yeah, exactly. Something that did jump out to me as well is that idea of his own face of judgment of his own making. His own making is really interesting, where it deflects the creation of that judgment onto Healy's actions. But to the jury, the way that it sounds is this guy's gonna have to reckon with himself. But what that means is he's given me no choice. It's a really clever It's really clever. I think it's really a complicated, multi kind of layered thing that's happening here. And yeah,
it's all just centered around Matt as well. Like everything about that speech sort of like comes back to him, like in so many different ways. Like, yeah, yeah. That's what we've been saying, man. Like this show is like so tight, man. It's just everything, as is the case with all the shows we love. It's like an Indra's web. Like everything just connects to everything.
Like I guess it's really intently interested on. Yeah, it's really interested in the things it's talking about, and so it's constantly about those things. And I think that's like a real characteristic of stories that tend to work really well. Is like, and you can have like a continuity that changes what it's interested in, right? Like some of the later seasons of Breaking Bad change what they're interested in about Walt and Jesse and their relationship to the criminal element. And their understanding of their place in it. I think particularly after, I want to say it's like the end of season 3, where Jesse makes a decision to kind of like to damn himself to save their lives, and that changes Walt and Jesse's relationship to the criminal element and to what they're doing. It suddenly goes from like, oh, this was a way to make money to like, this is our lives now. So you do get those shifts of like the thematic lens, but it's always about the same thing. It's really impressive how, I mean, you even have like, so Karen is offered hush money basically by Union Allied. And just in the constant Karen way of like making everything worse for herself, she goes and talks to the widow of Daniel, her coworker, who she was accused of murdering, and sort of is like, I can't let this go. And this woman who clearly already signed the hush money, like took the deal, is like, I don't care. Like, you need to just leave me alone and let it go. Like, what are you doing? And that's what spurs her to go and talk to Uruk about it. Who also has the most dire life of anyone in this show. Like, it's so grim. His setup. Do you want to speak to, I guess, like Uruk and like, I guess, how you see him fitting into the picture?
Did I already make the No Country for Old Men comparison? I think I did.
You did, yeah. Yeah.
So I think, Wisecrack has this really interesting take on, or like this video on that movie, about how they think that the three protagonists of that movie are like symbolically protagonists from different eras of Western movies. And the Tommy Lee Jones's character is as if you just took the protagonist from a classic Western and dropped it into a neo-Western. And obviously those two ideologies don't gel. And so he's just really confused at like the sheer like sort of evil and uncomprehendable evil that he sees in Anton Chigurh. And I feel like it's kind of similar with Ben Urich. He's, he has that conversation with that Italian mobster at the beginning. And there's that really great line, it used to be that when you killed someone, you sent his wife flowers. Now they just send your wife with you.
Send your wife with you, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just this like really like unbelievably formidable opponent that Ben, this old school reporter who's been chasing Italian mobsters, is suddenly up against. It's just like this really like colossal, monstrous sort of endeavor he has before him.
Yeah, and he's not the guy he used to be. Like, he's like haggling over like different insurance policies and stuff to try and get his wife the care she needs. Like, his boss is like, everyone we know is making, triple what we do writing blogs in their underwear kind of thing. Like real journalism's dead, dude. Like, you're the old guard and we keep you around because we respect you, but like, your work is done. And then off the back of that, Karen comes in and is like, hey, I read your article. And he sort of goes, the fluff piece about the subways. She's like, no, the Union Allied corruption. And you kind of get this moment of like the old guard is called back into action, right? The retired gunslinger has one final job. And those of us that understand how these things go know where Ben's story is going to end. Almost immediately, I'm like, this isn't good for him. Like he did need to leave this fight. This isn't for him, but it's like, I think Karen is what spurs him into getting involved. And that ultimately leads to her conflict with Wesley, I guess. But yeah, it really is drawing on a lot of that. I don't know that he's just such a compelling character in such a grim situation, right? Like his wife has sort of some kind of, we don't really get an explicit explanation of what's wrong with her for a few episodes, but like some kind of degenerative disease mentally, we assume. It's definitely not like cancer or anything like that. It's definitely like something like early onset Alzheimer's or something of that nature.
Some sort of dementia maybe, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just sort of this guy who is in this really grim position who decides that he's going to step out of his lane and do this thing. He hasn't made that decision yet, but you can see the second Karen walks in and they have that initial dialogue. You can feel him. It feels like he needs to do this, given that is his current situation.
And it's also a really fitting trajectory to set Karen on as well. This line of, reporting the truth. Again, it adds another interesting foil to the kind of morality that Foggy and Matt explore. Karen's off in this world of, pursuing the truth, no matter the cost. Despite all these terrible consequences to happening to people who've tried similar things, Karen and Ben share that same conviction and that same morality.
Contrasted against Matt, who is constantly obfuscating the truth to do the right thing and to achieve his ends. And in both instances, we see the consequences of that, right? Like in this episode, Matt sort of, he pursues this case with Healy, knowing that it's the wrong thing to do, but knowing it'll get him closer to the truth, right? In the same way that he lies to do that and lies about being the man in black, Karen becomes a really interesting foil for that. She seems to misapprehend the utility of obscuring the truth to achieve what you mean, and Matt seems to fail to understand when the truth is appropriate. And in some ways, that's why they're perfect for each other. Is doing that work is what will let them become compatible in some sense. And
there's also a lot of basis for conflict, which you better believe is going to be a focus point of my fanfic. I'll tell you what,
big time. It's going to be. Let me tell you, there'll be lots of kitchen sinks being thrown. And it's going to lead to some steamy encounters, Patrick. Don't you worry about that. But I guess the other thing I wanted to pivot to there is we didn't say this I mean, it's in the summary, but I just want to kind of duck down on this because I think it's relevant to what we're discussing here, which is Matt kind of he confronts. So after the trial, Matt confronts Healy in costume, and he basically threatens to kill him, and he's like, "You need to tell me who you work for." And I guess this is my point that I was making earlier, which is like, and in this moment, Matt's biggest threat in general isn't mortal jeopardy, though it is that, like, he is in danger of being killed, but it's the damnation of his soul, right? Like, this is the moment where it's like he has the devil inside of him, and the question that he has to, the thing he has to grapple with is like how much he lets it exercise itself and how much of it he's actually in control of. And how much of it he encourages as well, right? Because he this whole thing has been set into motion because Matt wanted to work out who Wesley's employer was, because Matt knows this is related to Union Allied. Like, he has set this whole thing in motion to work out who Wesley's boss is. And it's this question of, like, how far is he willing to go to do that? And what we end up seeing is he pressures, literally, like, by threat of death, he pressures Healy into revealing, in this moment of fear for his own life, who his employer is, and he says it's Wilson Fisk. And Matt sort of lets him go. We get this really stark moment where, as Healy recovers from the threat on his life, the immediate threat in his life, he realizes and explains pretty quickly, like, oh, like, I'm a dead man. Like, it's over. Like, he will make an example of me. There is nowhere far enough I can go to escape this guy. And then he, in a scene that we have to watch, like the show makes us watch this, he impales his head onto this kind of bladed fence that's designed to keep homeless people out.
My man goes,
oh, it's so much. And Matt just stands there and like just has this moment of like, holy shit, like what have I done? Like this, and he knows what he needs to know now, but like at what cost? And this will become the theme of the rest of the season. It's like, but like, even like, is preventing harm worth this? Like, is it worth Matt like dragging himself through the muck to get there? And it's a really interesting contrast with what Karen and Ben are doing, I think, which is a very similar exercise but in a different arena.
yeah. I wonder, I can't remember if Matt dwells on this guy much. I don't think he does.
Not this guy, but it becomes it's
another in a long series of indirect like deaths caused by Matt, which
Yeah.
is interesting. Which is another thing you better believe is going to be brought up in my fanfic.
Oh,
so,
100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Pat, for those who don't remember, Pat is writing his ideal finals. Is it a final season or a next season of Daredevil?
Or that's a good question.
Maybe don't give that away. Maybe don't give that away.
Yeah.
Maybe hold on for that. The way that this show is going to end, because inevitably Daredevil Born Again won't be great because it's Disney. Inevitably, when the show ends, Pat is going to give us his perspective season 4 of the show, and I'm very excited. So okay, one thing I want to say is talk to me about the Fisk reveal. It's very brief. To set it up, so Healy impales himself, and we get the kind of few frames of Matt reacting or failing to react because it's like so shocking. And then we cut to we have a little interim sequence where Wesley and Leland are in the car, and Leland's like, I need to talk to him. Wesley's like, hey, he's indisposed. And then we cut to an art gallery where Vanessa, the curator, this very kind of elegant woman, comes up to a man staring at a painting, and it's sort of this layered white painting. And she sort of explains, she comes up to him and she says, a lot of people don't get this. They say, why would you pay so much money for, a few dabs of paint on a canvas? And she says, the way I see it, it's kind of like that old children's joke. You hold up a piece of paper, ask what this is a picture of, and then you explain it's a rabbit in a snowstorm. And he says, the man says, it's about, I think art is about what you feel. And she says, what do you feel? And he sort of looks at it and considers it, and he says, it makes me feel lonely, makes me feel alone. And this is Wilson Fisk. Mm-hmm. And it's a really contemplative moment. What do you think of this introduction? And then we'll talk about what the fuck a rabbit in a snowstorm means, because that's also what the episode is called.
Yeah. So I don't think this means much unless you have watched the series already. Like, it's because it's a bit cliche. Villain likes high art. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, this is something we've seen a lot of times. But with the context of the entire show, like pretty much every important element regarding Fisk is here. You got the painting, you got Vanessa, who is arguably, the cornerstone of his character moving forward.
Got the cufflinks from his dad.
Yeah, cufflinks, yeah. All the most interesting things about Fisk are sort of demonstrated right off the bat here, which I guess is, is pretty interesting how the show kind of knows. I guess, I mean, it's just prudent to know what's going to be interesting about your villains early on, I guess, suppose. But yeah, it's just notable that it's notable that even Vanessa is introduced before Fisk. Their relationship is the most compelling thing about
that is
about
interesting.
The villains.
Yeah, because like you see his force of will upon the world through Wesley and through all these criminals and stuff. But yeah, you see Vanessa before you meet him.
Because I think, in my opinion, the most compelling thing about Wilson Fisk is how much he respects Vanessa. Because, I mean, unfortunately, you know, the trope of villains in a lot of Western media is that they're like misogynists, and I feel like this is how I took it. I feel like this is probably how a lot of other people took it as well. That in the coming episodes, as Vanessa and Wilson's relationship develops, you expect a turning point of Wilson to reveal his dark underbelly and he's maybe like hit Vanessa or abuse her in some kind of fashion, but he never does that. He's always very respectful of Vanessa, which is a subversion of tropes.
I'd never put that together.
Yeah.
I guess he's also a character of contrast, right? That's the whole appeal of Wilson Fisk as a villain. Is he's a character like he can have this this appreciation for high art, and he can have he dresses well and he grooms himself, and he has a beautiful penthouse that's curated, and he can also use a car door to sever a dude's head, right? Like he is this
just your basic skills,
just your basic important stuff in high society, right? And that's he wears black and white. Like there is something about there's something happening there at a thematic level, I think. We get this painting that becomes it's a recurring motif in this season, and then it comes back in season 2 and in season 3 in different forms, I want to say, without saying too much about kind of where they go with it. And then it becomes one of the centerpieces of the finale of the show. So I think it's notable that a rabbit in a snowstorm shows up here and shows up notably. What do you make of the episode being called A Rabbit in a Snowstorm?
That's interesting. Makes you feel lonely.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how that relates to Matt Murdock at all. I mean, he's generally a lonely guy, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer. That's why I asked. Vanessa says, you hold up a piece of paper, you ask what this is a picture of, and then you say a rabbit in a snowstorm. I think it's sort of about isolation to do with deception in some sense. I think there's this sort of idea of duality, of a hidden life. There's something there about this episode is about Matt concealing the man in black and using his real life to achieve the ends of his vigilantism, where he's holding up the piece of paper which is Matt Murdock, that looks for all the world to be Matt Murdock, but then actually it's a rabbit in a snowstorm, right? It's the devil of Hell's Kitchen manipulating reality to get what he needs from Healy, which is to identify Wilson Fisk at whatever cost. I think there's something there.
Yeah, and if you're a rabbit it would blends into the snowstorm similarly. I guess Matt Murdock blends into the criminal world of Hell's Kitchen. He's, even though he is fighting against them, he's he's a violent person. He's committing violence, which is just another drop in the ocean of crime that is Hell's Kitchen kind of stuff. Right.
He is in some way inseparable from the nature of the canvas, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's
good wording.
Yeah. God damn. This is what I mean by this show. Just it chucks a bunch of really interesting things at the wall and goes, "Hey, what do you think about that?" But it was when I finished the episode this morning, and I was thinking about I was going through my app, and the way that the thing I used to watch the show works is it shows me what I just watched and what I'm about to watch, and I saw A Rabbit in a Snowstorm as the episode title, and I was like, huh. That's really notable. Like the other episodes are sort of focused on Matt's childhood, right? You had like Cutman, and then you had whatever the first episode is called. I've already forgotten.
Into the Ring,
which are very boxing focused, and then this one is just like so different. And then the rest of the episode names kind of end up being a bit more of this kind of metaphorical sort of thing. With the absence of like that episode that's just called Stick. But like it's interesting. I don't know. I think a lot of the time, one of the things I will never forget from my writing degree is like people call stuff things for a reason. A book title is a book title for a reason. It can tell you a lot about like how the people that made it want you to approach it or think you should approach it. Same with like episode titles. Like even if it happens after the fact, it can tell you a lot about like what they think the framing is that you should have when you undertake consuming this. And I don't know, for me, like it's a real, it's very much them being like, hey, our show's about something and we're pretty confident that we're interested in that and you will be too.
You can always be sure that there's a lot of concentrated thought in titles.
Yeah.
You stare at in that one word, you just know there's hours of people going,
so much time
concentrated into that word.
And so many other names that you write down where you're like, is this one? Is this one of them? And then you write like so many names down and you're like, okay, I've narrowed it down to 5. And then you text everyone you know and you're like, okay, so I have these 5 names. Which one do you like the most? And then literally everyone you know comes back and is like, it's this one. And you go, oh. Okay, I guess it is that one. Then you call it that one, and you put it out in the world, and people are like, "That's the fucking best title," because people know what the fuck they're doing. Like, it's a really good way of getting feedback. Is just get a shortlist and send it out. My first book was going to be called Maynard Trigg and the Lady in Silver, which is nowhere near as compelling as Maynard Trigg and the Creature Beneath the Veil. Like, it's just not. There's no competition.
I mean that. I think I know which character you're talking about. She's not even that prominent in the first book, is she?
I mean, she's the main villain, but like, you know, it's still I suppose. It's sorry, she's like she's the main voice of antagonism, but she's not the baddie. But like, that's because like as the person that creates it, you're often too close to work out what the thing is that's gonna hook people in. I'm really bad at titles as well, so I just have to rely on everyone else to help me out.
Or you could just name it some random shit and let like really astute viewers go, oh, I see.
What does that
very
mean? Yes,
meaningful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let them read their own meaning into it. Well, the it's funny you say that because City of Whispers, which is book 2, has multiple meanings. I didn't mean it to have multiple meanings. It was a thing that gets said like halfway through the book, and I was like, oh, that's a catchy title for a book. I'll put that on the cover. And then my marketing guy was like, yeah, we'll print that. And then I've seen a few people be like, oh man, like, it's a metaphor for like, it's like a double meaning. It's like the city itself, because it's like full of people who are lying, but then also it's like the city beneath the city that like the vault is. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess it does do that. Yeah, definitely that was the plan for sure. Big time.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Big.
Who do you think you're talking to, mate? Come on.
That was what I meant the whole time. For sure. Okay. Any kind of closing thoughts you want to cover on this group of episodes?
I just want to highlight this really fucking great line after Wesley comes into their office and then he leaves, and then Foggy's sort of going, Matt, what the hell, Matt? Why are you so stubborn? And Matt goes, well, this whole thing seems really sus. And Foggy says, well, you wouldn't care if you could see the zeros on this check. And then Matt says, well, maybe you would if you couldn't.
Oh, it's such a good exchange. Good. Yeah. But it's the kind of thing that they could only say to each other because they know each other so well. I think that's part of what makes it really compelling is Matt's like, Matt both doesn't see the money, Pat, but he also doesn't see the money. Right? Like,
yeah.
They got us good. It's a really good line.
I also at the beginning of the episode, he's sitting on the bench and Father Lantom sort of offers to, if he wants to talk. Which again, Father Lantom is another different layer of morality which is explored in the show, which is super interesting. About it's his sort of duty to get Matt to open up and tell him about his life, and in order to help him pretty much, and it's just another way of how people try to help other people.
There's a really interesting. I think the show is also really interested in the structure of religion and the structure of like Catholicism, and Christianity writ large, because I think the show understands that like systematically there are issues with how these things work and function. I think it seems to comprehend that like as a technology, religion has kind of run its course. Like it is like an outdated technology that we've used to like grapple with parts of reality. And there's a comment I really like in that exchange where the father says something like he says something like, like the seal of confession, you could tell me you killed someone and I couldn't even say a word to anybody. And Matt says, do you think that's fair? And it's a really interesting response to that. Like, and he, like, as he said that, I paused it and I was like, what is that? Like, what is Matt asking there? This idea that like, and like, is he asking, is that fair to the father to like have to hold that burden? Right? Like, is he saying, is it fair on you that this system we have in place, whether that's a system that is ordained by God or whether it's a system that we've implemented as men, right? Like, is he saying, is it fair on you, Father, that's the case? Is he saying that that's fair on like the victims of the people who are related to someone that could get killed, and that in confession you could confess? Is he saying that because he's thinking about himself and what confessing what he's done would mean, and the position that would put the father in? Like it's such an ambiguous way to respond to that question.
Yeah, I think the way I took it was, to Matt, it's just another example of a system of trying to help people that fails, and further justifies what he does. Yeah. It's add it to the list.
Add it to the list, baby. Things that don't work for Matt Murdock. Religion. It's just a really like thought-provoking way to respond to that. I also really enjoy the father's kind of like, he's like, we should get a latte or whatever. They gave us this fancy machine from the Chamber of Commerce. And there's this sort of like, I don't know what the right word for it, but I think there's a casualness to the way that he wants to help Matt that I find really engaging. And I think is a really like clear rendering of his character, where it's like he knows that Matt kind of wants to talk to him, and he's just kind of patiently waiting for like when Matt's ready. He's a really cool. He just seems like a great guy, frankly.
I was thinking like, I wish I had a Father Lantom in my life.
Yeah, exactly.
that would push me into just talking about my stuff.
Yeah, exactly. If every therapist could be that patient, the world would be a better place. Yeah. Unfortunately, they're on an hourly rate, and church doesn't pay tax, so they're in no hurry. I mean, incredible intro to the show, I think. As a grouping of first 3 episodes to set up Fisk as like the primary antagonist of this season, absolutely stellar. I'm so excited to watch more of this show, Pat.
Yeah,
it's so good. Yeah. Look, next time we'll be covering episodes 4 through 6. So it's episode 4, In the Blood, episode 5, World on Fire, and episode 6, Condemned. All, of course, written by Bill Everett and Drew Goddard. So we're on Main Street, we're on Flavor Street, and it's going to continue as we try and set up, I guess, a little bit of, it's a little bit more of Matt's backstory. It's a little bit of, I guess, we get a lot more Fisk in these next few episodes, setting him up as a person, setting him up as like a like an individual and how, you know, and then I guess after that episode we'll get into a little bit of like what made him that individual. But we certainly are going to extrapolate on the threat that is Wilson Fisk and what motivates him to do what he does, which is really exciting. Any final thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I'll just say that, you know how I was watching the show, like I was just going ahead and watching all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped at season 2 because I finished season 2 and then I really, really, really didn't want to watch The Defenders, and so I haven't watched season 3. So, and therefore I'm gonna make a lot of I'm gonna draw a lot of lines between the later parts of the show up until the end of season 2. And the reason I don't talk about season 3 is because I can't remember it because I haven't watched it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
That's going to make season 3 really fun, I think, because I haven't watched that in a while either. Maybe since it came out, if I'm being honest. I don't think I've rewatched it, so...
I think I've watched it at least twice.
I know I watched season 1 and 2, like, so many times it's embarrassing. Yeah, join us next time, episodes 4 through 6. We appreciate the heck out of you watching or listening. You can... Pat, where can people find a Method to the Madness? Where can they support what you do?
People can find a Method to the Madness podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. We have a website, amttm.com, and we have links to all our socials from there.
Love it. If you want to help support the show, we're kind of a crossover pod, which is something we haven't really done before.
Episode.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll do more of this in the future, but the best way to support the show is to go check out Method to the Madness on your podcast catcher of choice and give it a review or a rating. Find an episode you like. We did a series on James Bond that's really fun. If you want to support what I do, you can find our publication, ZeroIndent, at ZeroIndent.com. We publish articles, usually at least 1 or 2 a month. And if you're thinking to yourself, man, that Man on Trigger series sounded really interesting, you can find that at underink.press, which is our independent publishing brand that sits under Zero Indent. So that's underink.press. We appreciate you watching or listening. If you enjoyed this, please consider doing the things you guys do with podcasts. Give it a rating or a review on your podcast catcher of choice. Leave a comment, leave a like. You know how the whole algorithm works. It helps other people find this show. But if we're being honest between you and me and Pat, the best way you can help support the show is to send this to one person you think might like it. If you have that one friend where you're like, man, they think about stuff and they're interested in philosophy or literature, or they really like, you know, YouTube video essays, things like that, consider sending them a link to this. It really does help us out. We appreciate the heck out of you being here, and we will catch you next time for our second episode. We will be covering episodes 4 to 6 of Netflix's Daredevil. So we'll catch you guys then.
See you later.